over the last several semesters, really, is that there are some really great benefits to this. So I've been doing my courses synchronously with an asynchronous option. For our students in our department in particular, many of whom are mid-career professionals, having the option to attend class synchronously or review work asynchronously has really turned out to be a great benefit. I also learned over time that it was actually, at least for the subjects that I teach, which is mostly history and some qualitative research methods classes, it seemed to work better to record class discussions rather than to record lectures, because coming into those interactions, students got a chance to listen to the questions that other students raised, and perhaps it was a little more natural as well to what they were used to in terms of class participation. I think what I have tried to do that works well, I'm sure that I'm anxious to hear what other people are doing, is that it is very much based on discussion rather than straight lecture. And I try to break it up with different kinds of smaller group activities whenever possible. And usually that has something to do with, I will set up a Google Docs document where groups are working in smaller groups and can either post their comments, or often we in my classes, we do workshop style things so that they can comment on each other's work. I actually mixed the synchronous students with the asynchronous students with the synchronous students in classroom groups. I found that worked better than just putting all of the asynchronous students in a group, and try as much as possible to include them, whether they're present or not, in the activities that we're doing. That seems to work relatively well. I think a lot of the asynchronous students sometimes feel very isolated, so that has helped build some connections. The other thing, this is more labor intensive in many ways, although more rewarding. What I ended up doing was creating many more one-on-one meetings with students, particularly in the research classes. That is way easier to do when I can say, sure, I'll talk to you at 7:30 in the morning, in my pajamas with a cup of coffee, if that's easy, or at 8 o'clock at night, which is often the case for many working parents. I don't mind doing that, and it's created in many ways a lot more flexibility, and that ability to get to know students on a much more personal level, I think, shows that online learning, remote learning doesn't have to be impersonal in the ways that we imagine it. But it does take work. This is not something that it's labor intensive, so it doesn't necessarily mean we can have way more students at least in the classes that I do. But I think for particularly working parents, which is a lot of our students, there are some benefits to that. So that's just my experience.
Thank you. I think I have some questions, and I think what I'd like to do is get through the panel and then come back to questions. So thank you. Dr. Logan, would you like to follow that up?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Happy to be here. So when Anne sent out this call, I had just finished filling out my annual review. So I just copied all the stuff from my annual review and sent it off and said, is this the kind of thing you're looking for? So I can talk a little bit about how I pivoted my class to be online. So in the online environment, the first thing that I did when we sort of pivoted to online instruction is I started reaching out to all of my friends who teach statistics courses in other classes. So I'm teaching primarily in introductory and intermediate statistical courses, so it's data analysis courses. And so we talked within that group of people talked a lot about trying to spin these into opportunities. So the opportunities that this really presented to us, to provide different types of learning environments for students. So there were a couple of things that I did this last year. Gosh, which things should we talk about? I don't even know. My course tends to be lecture based primarily. I'm delivering a lot of content to the students, and they have a lab in which they do their work. And so the way that I broke this up in order to sort of reinforce concepts was to do the beginning of the class would always be sort of a review of what people's homework assignments have been. And that is with students being on, I'd have some students on Zoom and some students in person. And then, so in their homeworks, they're applying these techniques to their actual data sets that they're working on. So I take examples from the students and then am talking through them using the board to sort of walk through the concepts of the statistical method. And then after we've done that a little bit and answered some questions, then I introduce some new material. And then what I really loved about being able to teach online is the breakout rooms. So we would teach online, and then I give these little informal quizzes. It's like 10 questions or something for students to take, and I have unlimited opportunities to take and retake them to try and check their own learning and to check my teaching, basically. So I give them these 10 questions. We give them 5 minutes to work by themselves and then 10 minutes to get into groups and talk together and try to answer the questions. And then we all come back together and sort of discuss what they've learned in that situation. So one thing I was really grateful for in terms of using the technology was the ability to make these online quizzes that tie directly into the grade books, which, I mean, they're actually ungraded, but participation credit for completing the quizzes. I like that they have the opportunity to randomly be put in groups. And then I used to have a randomizer that I would like literally roll dice and put people into groups. And this is much easier, much faster. Nobody moves around. There's none of that awkward situation of who's supposed to, like, oh, should I be with my friend or with someone else? And then I think that actually it reinforces my course objectives of helping students to be able to understand these techniques, these statistical techniques from multiple perspectives, so that it helps them understand how it can be applied in multiple areas, which, as we know from language development, or sort of once you learn something, you begin to generalize it at first, and it takes a lot of different examples before you're able to collapse it down into something that's really, that by seeing many examples, you learn what they have in common, and then you can see how they're, like, what's the same about them. I can't remember which things I put in that course. That I don't know. I had a lot of stuff there. So I'll stop there and maybe we can come back to other ideas later on.
Great. Thank you so much. We're going to move now from to some actual activities that a couple proposed in terms of student engagement. And so I think I'm going to go to Dr. Pasquay.
Sure. Good to see everybody. Thanks for the invitation and the conversation. I'm looking forward to the conversation. So like you all pivot online. And so with the qualitative methodological courses that I'm teaching, I think people were having a hard time with congruency and thinking through all the way. And so I had this exercise in my pocket, and then I got invited to write a chapter about an exercise about how to use theory throughout the design and connect it with congruence. So kind of a big thing. So I put together an exercise with a grad student, Chelsea Gilbert. So I do want to give her a shout out. And we have the exercise in the chapter that's in process right now, but we had to throw it online, right? So you could do this with sticky notes anywhere, but you could also do it in Jamboard. So we threw it in Jamboard, and part of what we did was talk through what is your theoretical framework, and then let's pick racial battle fatigue. Now pick through what is your paradigmatic approach. And we had, I think actually I had, here we go, slide 5. So you can see where becoming is the theoretical framework. And then there's a lot of different research questions that people could put in the box. Which one is congruent and fits? Ethnography. Ooh, no, I think I want to do phenomenology for this because it matches congruently with the question that I have. I'm actually playing with the group's work. And then what kind of coding, if you are using, if you're familiar with more existential phenomenology, some hermeneutic phenomenology, they might use bridling instead of researcher reflexivity, for example, and trustworthiness, collection methods, analysis methods, etc. And so students actually in their small groups could think through the theory. We talked through the theory. I gave them a bunch of theories in their small groups, and then together started putting through the intentional research design, then coming back and thinking about, why was this difficult? What note cards did you have to make up yourself? How to think through theory in your analysis process and not just abandon it. Even if you're doing grounded theory, right? They have arguments about that in terms of analysis. And there are ways that theory does play into a grounded theory emergent design that Sharmaz and other people have written about. So in any case, it gives us a great discussion point in small groups in the breakout rooms. I'm a big fan. Let's get together, talk in a big group, breakout rooms, then come back. Another thing about modality, if I may, the students really have said good things about the different types of breakout rooms. I have set small groups where they always work with the same people. And then other times it's the random generator. So they get an opportunity to connect with students throughout the class. So they've given positive feedback about that. I'll stop there if that's okay.
Yes, thank you very much. That sounds like something I would love to do, is move those sticky notes around. Like a lot of fun. Dr. Joseph?
Yes. So Debbie, are you going to share or you want me to share? Oh, I think she's going to share. Okay. So, I've been participating in one of the Drake Institute's book clubs. And the book club that we've been doing this year is one called How Learning Works. And I put the resource here, How Learning Works, 7 research-based principles for smart teaching. And you can go to the next slide, Debbie. And so one of the topics for one of our sessions was how to help students organize knowledge and the content that they're learning in the class in an engaging way, in a way that's meaningful for the students. So one of the suggestions was using concept maps, and being being in the field of school psychology and special education, we're always teaching our students about different strategies that kids can use in the classroom at school. And so one of the things that we've always talked about is using story maps, concept maps, but I never thought about that in terms of using it with my graduate students, in our program. So one of the courses I'm teaching this semester is a course on ethics and supervision in school psychology. And my students have to learn about various models of supervision in my class. And I thought, instead of just quizzing them on, the different aspects of each model, I thought, what's a way that I can engage them with the models and then that the models have more meaning for them. So one of the exercises that I thought I would have them do is use a concept map to create their own model of supervision, but they had to use aspects of the models that they learned about, the models that were presented to them in the literature and the models that I talked about in my lecture. So they had to use components of they didn't have to use components of all the modules, but they had to pick and choose components of the various modules that they would use to create their own model of supervision. So you can go to the next slide, Debbie. And so, you know, one of the things that I learned through this book club is that Concepts Map definitely helps students connect content in meaningful ways and in useful ways. And then also it helps students become a parent of how they are organizing their knowledge and how they're forming connections among concepts. But it also helps us as instructors. And this exercise really helped me as an instructor gain some insight on, you know, how the students are organizing their thoughts and representing their knowledge, how they're arranging concepts and connecting them. And then it also, if you can use concept maps at the beginning of your course, the middle and end of your course to kind of measure their developmental progression in terms of how they're connecting the information that you're presenting in the course. And you can go to the next slide. So this was my assignment. I wanted them to make connections about the various components of the different supervision models, like I mentioned, and that they can incorporate those components to create their own. So they were asked to do this, and then they were asked to write a paragraph or two explaining their model. So I want to show, so one of the things I was excited about, you know, this was something new that I did for this course. And I wasn't sure what they were going to come up with, how their models were going to look, and how their concept maps, you know, were going to look. And so I was excited when I saw some of the work of my students, and it gave me kind of an insight on, you know, what they think with regards to supervision, what aspects of supervision have a lot of meaning to them, and what's important to them. So if you go to the next slide, this is an example of one of my students' model. So she had a model for supervising graduate students. And so she really pulled from the different models. And one of the models is a developmental model of supervision. Another model is the Rogerian, Carl Rogers kind of supervisee centered model. Another model is the strength-based model of supervision that we use. And she kind of pulled from some of these models, and she kind of divided her concept map into skills that supervisors needed. And then she talked about the role of supervisors, that supervisors play a teacher role, a counselor role, and so forth. And she talked about some of the developmental levels as well. So she really kind of incorporated several of the models that were presented in creating her own model. And the next slide, Debbie, you can go to the next. So this one didn't turn out as good. For some reason, this didn't copy as well. But so go to the next slide. This one didn't paste as well. I'm sorry. Oh, this is the next one was one of my students kind of came up with this way of organizing the information. She talked about a multicultural model as well as the developmental lifespan model and so forth. And she talked about what components in the models that resonated with her in creating her own model. So some components such as unconditional positive regard, genuineness, and empathy that a supervisor needs to show to their supervisee, and so forth. So these are just some examples of some of the models they came up with. But what was fun for me was that it was nice to see how students came up with what aspects of the models that they took and kind of made their own.
Great, thank you so much. This is really exciting. The last two pieces really, for me, really drive home the richness of using visual and physical activity in learning. And I think just the idea of being able to see your own ideas in front of you really highlights not only what you grasp and how you grasp it, what gaps there are, right? And you know, so I think those two pieces together are really exciting. I did have a couple of questions regarding the first pieces too, and I wanted to throw those out there before we open it up. But when you're working, Dr. Rante and Dr. Logan, when you're working in on online environments, and you're working with some students who might be asynchronous and some students who might be synchronous, how does that experience differ for those students? And then how do you as an instructor reconcile those differences? And that's a big question, but maybe that's just to be thrown out there. I was thinking particularly around the groups that are asynchronous and synchronous, right? So how is it that they work together?
Well, in my case, it's not necessarily that they can work together. They can give feedback back and forth on projects. And so Carmen isn't always a very good tool for, it seems to be unreliable with notifying both me and students when somebody else responds, but I will remind students to, go and check and make sure, if anyone has commented on a project that they've done in class. It's not something I necessarily do with all projects. It's easier to do, for example, if we're workshopping an interview protocol, for example. A lot of this has to do with student initiative too. There are classes when students reach out to other students and and connect. And so I'm still thinking that through, how to sort of foster that a little bit more. But a lot of times it's just been initiated by students themselves to reach out.
Great, thank you. Before we move on, I wanted to give Dr. Rose DeSalvo an opportunity to ask questions across these 4 ideas, but also to talk about the Drake Institute and the supports that the Drake Institute offers.
Thanks so much, Anne. I really appreciate being here. And I in particular appreciate being here because I'm a big fan of EHE. My own disciplinary background is higher ed curriculum and instruction. So ed studies, the College of Education, all of it is really close to my heart. And I really hope that we're able to, I think, both broaden and deepen our engagements with ed studies and also with other departments and programs at EHE, because I just think it's so critical. And I don't know how we forget sometimes to do it, but Anne is also with us at the Drake Institute Teaching and Learning Collaborative, which comprises faculty professional learning, faculty development leads at various units. And so we're really happy to have her connected to other units across campus. And we share information about programming, about initiatives, about efforts that might benefit all of us. It's also a time maybe to come together collaboratively and say, oh, you're doing that? I didn't know you were doing that. I'm not going to do that. I'll go over here and do this with you. And we're hoping that kind of really takes off. Some of what I was hearing in these wonderful presentations is they are exactly the same issues or contexts that the Drake Institute struggled with when we had to go remotely. There was, in fact, I think they align almost perfectly. What we actually appreciate, if you want to say there are good things that came out of the pandemic or that are coming out of the pandemic still, was the challenge to some of our ideas about how we do faculty professional learning and deliver faculty professional development, how we make connections, and also what the best programming really is, because we are part of a national organization that really has been very, I think, directive in terms of what best practices are, what innovation is, and how we deliver our programming to faculty. And this upended everything. And so I think that we can say that very clearly. And we figured out that maybe some of our assumptions were wrong about what we should be doing vis-a-vis faculty professional learning. Our response to it, like many of your responses, was, well, we're going to pick up tools. We found very quickly what tools that are delivered to us on an enterprise-wide level would work and what wouldn't work. Sometimes we have tools that are limited to, for example, College of Med will not, their faculty can't access some of the Microsoft tools. So we really had to figure that out very quickly. Our response tended to be in development of communities of practice, because people could come together around problems, and then we could say, okay, we don't have the answers, do you? And we could solve those problems together, or we could come up with some innovative solutions. Those were really, really valuable. And it's something that we continue today, especially with health sciences and clinical teaching, because those areas were particularly challenging. We also took everything to Zoom, as you did. We combined it with Carmen. We figured out what didn't work in Carmen, and you're so right, because if people don't have their settings, it doesn't matter what you do there. The other thing that we did was create an opportunity to come together with other colleges and universities across the state of Ohio with something called the Ohio College Teaching Consortium. And that was in direct response to COVID. It was in direct response to the fact that some of our colleagues are underfunded. They don't have centers for teaching and learning. They don't even have full departments of education. They don't have colleagues upon whom they might call. And so I'm going to share with you some of our kind of signature program handouts, and then a little bit about the Ohio College Teaching Consortium. And I throw that out because I'd really like, if any of you would like to present to Ohio higher education instructors across the state, we would love to have you join us and present some of these wonderful ideas that you're presenting right now in a smaller group. So I'm going to put those in the chat, and then I'm really here to answer questions as opposed to anything else. And I'll also put some websites. So you'll see the Drake Institute website. We'd really like to encourage everyone, if you are interested in research or implementation grant funds for teaching and learning, please do apply for those. Especially this year, we have extended the deadline because people are really busy. And I think they're also kind of just breathing, right? They're kind of, well, actually they're collapsing and then maybe breathing shallowly on the floor and recouping. So we do have funds for this. And I would also encourage, if you're interested in just writing some of what you have done up in a portfolio and you have not already received the instructional redesign compensation, it's not as heavy a lift as we think it is. It's simply describing, as you just did, the implementation of the teaching practice and how you assessed it. That's really it. Now, the problem is everybody here is uber overachiever, as it are all the faculty at Ohio State. So they think they have to turn in portfolios of maybe 85 pages. No, 5 will do. It'll summarize it, keep it succinct, and we're happy to help with that as well. So I'll start loading.
Thank you so much. And I see that Jessica has put something in the chat too, to share an example of bringing students together. I'd like to open it up to folks who are here and everyone around the panel too, to ask questions of each other. I think this is an opportunity for us to start talking about teaching. So I'm just going to open the floor. Does anybody have any questions or any comments that you'd like to make?
Yes, on the grant. I just think, I'm a recipient with a Qual-Lab group of students. I put the link in the chat, and we ended up doing a research apprenticeship together in the height of COVID. It was a diverse group. It was open to anybody in the college. And so I think the students were in particular struck by, I don't have to apply and do my resume and I'm accepted or not. It's open for anybody who wants to. And now they have a grant, research presentation at a conference that ended up going virtual, of course, and a pub. And we're working on the next piece of it. So we've benefited. And I think there are other people in this space, I think, who have had grants from you all too.
Great, thank you. Is there anybody here who might like to share some of the things that they're doing in their classroom? Or something similar that you've seen from today?
You know, someone had mentioned breakout rooms, which, I think we thought that they were a logistical challenge until we actually used Zoom, right? It took us a few times. We had to mess it up. We had to fail marvelously in front of students, which is always a good idea, especially if it's early in the morning, then you can, you've gotten it over with. And that's the kind of the way I look at it. But it's interesting when you talk about presenting to faculty. We had a group of both community college and university instructors together in the same Zoom space yesterday. And we were talking about inclusive teaching strategies for neurodiverse students. And we said, oh, it's time to go in the breakout room. And all of them went, we're not going. I mean, there were 30 some, and they said, no, we're not going into the breakout rooms. You're going to do this discussion in this big space. And, that flexibility of saying, okay, and what I was hearing, because here I was, oh yeah, let's go into breakout rooms. And they refused, which was okay. And they said, we want to hear what other people are saying and we want to engage. And I think it was probably the level of comfort in that group. They had introduced themselves so they could see who was present with them, and they didn't want to miss out on it. I think they also saw some of the diversity in the instructors and their disciplinary areas as well. And they knew that they would both benefit from that in a larger space, but also that it could be limiting when they got into, if we put them in smaller breakout groups and the randomized function didn't create the magic that it sometimes does.
That's terrific. And I think one of the questions that I had for everybody here on the panel was thinking about what we've just been through. What have you learned? And obviously you put these practices together as a result of doing something different. But in doing that, can the panel speak to what maybe one or two things that you actually learned from trying something new, or from having to deal with the challenges that we faced?
So much. We learned so much from this process. It was so wonderful. I tell you that I never would have considered teaching online. I would not have considered it. I had taken a couple of online classes in years before and thought they were terrible. Like, frankly, I learned nothing from any of those online classes. And so being forced into it, honestly, has ended up being terrific, because I was able to find a community of people who are still developing good and exciting pedagogical approaches to working with students online to ensure that they are feeling like a member of a community and that they are actually taking up these learning opportunities, and to try and keep people engaged. And so being able to implement all kinds of different strategies has been wonderful. And I think that there's nothing that I learned necessarily that will be in my practice forever, because really what this did is just reinforce that you have to change every year. Everything has to change every time you teach a class, because it's always I talk a lot about counterfactuals, but our baseline is always different. Our students are always different. That we get different new students every year, and different things are going to work for different groups of students. So I think that's what I took away with. Keep trying things and keep reaching out to people and looking at more opportunities and ideas that people have come up with, and take them into your own practice.
That's terrific. That's great. Others? Like one thing that you learned as you were putting these things together, or?
How about how to put videos on YouTube? I learned that. My kids were very impressed that I have a YouTube channel. I said, don't be.
I also feel like I never in a million years thought that I would do anything online. And it has forced me to be more purposeful of how I build in experiential activities, the kinds of collaborative work that I have students do. So it's engaged my thinking about varieties of ways that students can learn in ways that I had not anticipated when this all started. And I mean, I still have a lot to learn, but that was certainly, that's been exciting. I think that keeps me motivated to want to learn more.
That's great. Anyone else or any of our guests who might want to? Rick? Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand there.
It's okay. Excuse me. First of all, I wanted to thank everyone, the panel. This was, I learned so much listening to the care that and thoughtfulness that you put into teaching and how that translated, in an online setting. I went online quite a few years ago and sort of went through a lot of this pain previously, some of my classes now are, like one of them in particular went through like a major revision, and so and that was incredibly important to sit down with an instructional designer and to like look at each activity and assignment and sort of see if everything is still aligned and question somebody to question my assumptions, and I think as Dr. Arante mentioned, and clearly all of you have shown, it takes a lot of energy and time and energy to do this. And something that I think that I have, struggled with at this point now is now really engaging in the process that Dr. Logan talked about, is sort of that constant revision, because it's more than just like tweaking your syllabus, right? When you're starting to teach a class. And so, as I've taught a class now for the third time or the fourth time, I find myself, kind of doing some of that, just tweaking the syllabus and changing the due dates and because the amount of work. And so, my question is to the panel, I have a couple of questions, but I'm just going to ask one, and then if we have time, I'll ask another. What would be helpful to support you in continuing to engage in this process, this sort of continuous process to, from, and I'm going to leave it wide open. It could be staff help, it could be, it could be any number of things, but I would love to know, like, what, how you would feel, like what kind of support would help you to continue to engage in that, rather than so much of this stuff sort of comes off the skin of our back in time, and we don't get necessarily credit for it. A comment that I had a long time ago about P&T and the push to go online is, it does take more time and effort, and we still count it the same way, but it's fallen on deaf ears. So sorry for the long comment, but I just, I always appreciate listening and learning from, thoughtful teaching like this.
It's a great question.
I have one very concrete thing that may be helpful, is that I know that there are other excellent tools that exist, and I see my colleagues talking about using them, but the threshold that it takes to actually learn how to do the thing is way too high. And I've taken workshops through not Drake, the other one I can't think of the name of right now.
I think it's OD that is now ODTI.
ODTI, yes, I've taken through there where it was like learning about these new technologies, and it was, here's a list of technologies which did not help at all. It just sort of showed me lots more things about what I still didn't know how to do and didn't have the time and investment to use. So something very targeted of, here's a collaboration software that lets you annotate this manuscript. What a cool piece of software. I absolutely am not going to take the time. I mean, it was just too much time to learn how to use it. So those sorts of direct targeted things would be very helpful to me, at least.
Great, thank you. Shirley, you
And,
have
you
your
know, we
hand.
quickly started to say, oh, we're not going to, there are so many wonderful things out there. Isn't that great? Right? And that was the response. Isn't that great? And if it didn't serve that particular module's learning outcome, if it did not serve the participants very specifically, we absolutely didn't go there. And we didn't spend a lot of time in, you know, learning the tool. We found what worked, we replicated the process, and then we tried to iterate a little bit.
Can I ask a follow-up question to Dr. Logan before Dr. Arante was going to say something? You know, would it be helpful to have like that annotation tool? I forget the name of it. To have like somebody, you know, to say, hey, I want to use that tool in my class. Could somebody like come to my class that day and facilitate that? Or would that would that be, I'm curious if we had experts in some of these tools, that could come to your class and help facilitate an activity that day. They would, maybe there'd be like a pre-meeting where you say, here are the capabilities. So you have some sense of like what you can do, and then they come, and so you don't have to worry about necessarily, the ins and outs of like, how do you change the font color or whatever.
Dr. Wu, you have your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I just dropped it in chat. A very practical thing that would be useful for me personally is to get some assistance in completing the QM process. I recently found out that classes that I'm signed up to teach in the fall are not approved to teach online. And so now I'm scrambling, and that's something where it's just going to take a lot of time to complete, and it may not get approved on time.
Yeah, and I do think we have some support in the department, so I will make sure to reach out and get connected to you. And Penny, you're raising your hand too. So yeah, this kind of came up. The university has said that they need to have approvals for us to actually do that. So I'm going to do that. We'll reach out and get that connections.
And you're certainly not alone. I think that, across units, that comes up.
Is there anything else in relation to what the kinds of supports that you need to be a creative or innovative instructor, or the kinds of things that you'd like to see? It's been really a good conversation. What about recommendations for others who want to, maybe are still not sure about really engaging in online as fully as they might, or taking chances, or putting in that time because there's a tenure clock that has to be dealt with, or those kinds of things? Does anybody have any recommendations as to what they might say to folks who are hesitant?
I think the time issue is one of the things that has come up a couple times. I mean, so sometimes we're retooling in our classes, but do we always have time to put it thoroughly in our review, or let each other know, or the things that I've learned from you all today, how to revise and continue to rework? I mean, it just, there's not always the time to put it into every area of inner reviews or connecting with Drake and et cetera. And so I don't know how to address that, but I appreciate the thoughtfulness, and maybe there's ways to make that a little bit easier, whether it's the annual review process and you all recording it or knowing what's going on across the college and the wealth of information? Are people just not sharing it because of the time element? So, just trying to think about how to really increase that communication in a way that that doesn't discourage people from actually taking the time to really put it in one of the reporting mechanisms that we have currently available.
Great, thank you so much.
I don't know that this is necessarily helpful in terms of immediacy, but we have been working with newer faculty. We started NFO, and then right after new faculty orientation, we kind of move into a series of new faculty engagements. That's really under Helen Malone and our director, Kay Halasek. But I do some supporting there. And one of the mechanisms for support is a set of documenting your teaching kind of engagements. They're not necessarily workshops, but it's time to do some writing and also time to think about how you actually document that and how you might be able to track it over time. That doesn't, of course, there's a new faculty member, right? And that's a nice offering. And then of course, we always try and encourage the double duty part of it. If this is a wonderful example of implementation and you're doing the assessment already, can you deepen the engagement with one of the programs or publications, right? Because if they're connected and fortunately, Ed Studies recognizes the value of those kinds of connections. That's not always the case when it comes to a scholarship of teaching and learning or discipline-based education research.
Terrific.
And we'd always love to hear from you if you're thinking, if you all would just do this, our life could be so much easier. Would you just tell me, would you just send an email that says, Melinda, if you would just tell your people, if you would just do this, it would make life easier. Given the bureaucracy, we will certainly pass it on and try and do it.
I don't know how much sway you have over this, Melinda, but I know when I want to collect data from students and I ask them to complete surveys, they are surveyed to death. And I really question the utility and helpfulness of the SEIs. There's so much more relevant ways to collect data, and it just feels like that's not helpful. And if we were given some latitude in not using those and maybe asking them to complete surveys that would be relevant for our specific courses, it would make our annual reporting a lot easier too.
I am so glad you said that, because I'm going to take it straight back to the SEI subcommittee, and we have a meeting coming up in March. The SEI subcommittee, we are encouraging ourselves to move much more quickly. Sorry, I have an old dog hacking in the background. To move much more quickly on making recommendations to and working with a larger, more a broader committee that's working on evaluation of instruction, and that's Kay and Helen. So this particular committee has acknowledged that the questions, which haven't changed in forever and ever, need to be adjusted, that there needs to be more flexibility, that faculty need to be able to make some of those decisions about how their students survey them, especially in a more summative, way at the end. So that it just keep pushing us, because I'm going to take this back already to that committee. The other thing that I'm excited about is the Drake Institute is going to work with the registrar's office to look at perhaps a question bank that can be deployed by a faculty member for midterm evaluation, formative use, but then it's much more valuable to you, and you can still report it out in your dossier if it's quite valuable. But I think those two things might be, knowing that we still have to do certain things, but those two actions might really move the needle, at least to make the SEI process a little bit more valuable to faculty, and less traumatizing.
I will say this year, I surveyed students and asked them specifically to report on how well the assignments aligned with the course objectives and how well the assessment strategies I used aligned with course goals. And that really, I got a lot of really good information out of. So if anybody's looking to add questions, those were really useful.
I'd like to respond to what Melinda was just speaking about with the SEIs. I dropped it in chat as well. There is an item that is along the lines of, I am learning a lot from this instructor. And that item to me assumes that knowledge and learning resides with the instructor and that it is our job to, instill it or drop it into students' heads. I would love to see that item get edited. I've found that in discussion-based courses, students will say things like, "Oh, I'm learning more from my classmates than from Dr. Yu." Well, why do you think you're learning from your classmates? Because of the way that I constructed the class. So that's just my little 2 cents on that one.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Could EHE come up with its own SEI? Would that prod the university, or?
I
Is that-
actually think, Rick, that was tried once. I think that, I don't know about EHE, but I know that there was a push from the diversity office to include some items, but I never saw them. So I don't know. I don't know if each college has control over them or not.
I think that's, Melinda, you would know, but I think that's university governed.
You have to do it. And I think that the flexibility might be based on type of program, right? So professional programs with clinical teaching, that there's an ability to kind of flex there, but I'd have to actually go back and look. There's some flexibility. And I think that I know that there's some flexibility, but I'll have to get back with you on what that is. And actually getting the entire unit to agree.
Easier than the university all agreeing on something.
That's true. That's true.
Could I make a suggestion? There are so many great ideas that came out of today, and I know that it was recorded. I think it's incredibly effective to hear things from our peers. I don't know if you have a grad student that, that's working with you, but you could take that video and edit, some really amazing snippets to send out to faculty, to send out the department. You can include, some of the materials that were shared, like Dr. Logan's Twitter stream, things like that. Some really great examples. Dr. Joseph's concept maps, and how she, developed that as a result of her experience at Drake Institute. I think, so many of these opportunities, like this sort of, get passed by, and, but it's just a suggestion that, just have somebody pull a few chunks out and share it.
That's a great idea, Rick. We will do that, won't we, Debbie?
I was gonna say, that's me, Dr. Boyhofer.
Oh, okay.
Happy to do that.
I wasn't sure.
I've been-
Okay.
I have been pulling all the links from the chat and kind of summarizing the conversation. So
Yeah.
I will be sure to get that recording out as well to everybody once I've kind of synthesized it and put it into something. And forgive me, I'm sick. So, but
okay.
yes, I think it's it would be a lost opportunity if we didn't then share out everything we learned today. So,
But bite-sized pieces,
for sure. Definitely
not,
small
if it's like,
We'll work on it and get it out. It might be a week or so, but we'll work on it and get it out.
Thanks.
I do want to thank everyone for coming, and I want to thank the panelists for being willing to share what you're doing in the class and just opening up this conversation. We, been here a long time. We don't talk about teaching very much, so it's really great that we do that. Is this something that you'd like to do maybe twice or 3 times a semester or something like that, or on a regular basis?
Yeah.
I think it would be really fun. So I know it takes time, but thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and have a lovely weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Dr. Joseph, I'm